Recording in progress.
Good afternoon. Okay.
Good evening. Good afternoon. It's not evening. I know. Good afternoon. I'd like to call our budget work session to order. Madam Clerk, would you take the roll, please?
Brenham,
Present.
Pugh,
Here.
McBride, Livingston,
Here.
Teratio, Weaver,
Here.
Barron,
Here.
Walker,
Here.
Mackey,
Here.
English, Newton.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Just would like to say that Ms. English did reach out to me and she is on her way. She's just a few minutes. Next is adoption of the agenda. Do we have any additions or deletions?
There are no recommended changes, Madam Chair.
I'll entertain a
Second, Madam Chair.
motion and a second. Discussion. Madam Clerk.
Brenham,
Yes.
Pugh,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Weaver,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Walker,
Yes.
Mackey, English, Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you. First item up is the cost allocation plan. Administrator Brown, you're recognized.
Thank you. Members of council, this particular work session, we're going to be discussing some cost allocation and enterprise funds. As you are aware, this part of our season is budget, so we'll have a number of budget work sessions where you'll hear from various entities and various members of my administration. And today will be members of my administration. So first up, we're going to have the director of our budget office, Ms. Wilkerson. So she's going to come and present. You should have a packet in front of you. And we'll just ask her, Chair, if you would recognize her, and then we'll proceed with the program.
Thank you. You're recognized, Ms. Wilkerson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Apologize, I'm just going to switch over to my laptop if that's all right. All right, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you again, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to come speak with you all, and thank you, County Council, for inviting me here tonight or this afternoon. So first up, we'll talk about kind of what we're going to go over today. So our agenda, I'm going to start with the cost allocation plan, then I'll switch it over to Director Maloney and Mr. Savalas to talk about the airport and solid waste, and then lastly, we'll wrap it up with Director Davis and the Utilities Department. So starting with the cost allocation, which if you want to follow along with your recommended budget book, that's on page 4. So here we talk about our strategic plan and some of those initiatives, and one of those is to talk about cost allocation. So just to remind y'all what a cost allocation plan is, and as you can see on the slide, it's a process to distribute countywide administrative costs to enterprise and special revenue funds. So when we think about enterprise funds, we think about those as similar to like a private business where they operate, they are self-sufficient, they should operate off of their revenues, their expenditures, or their revenues should be sufficient to cover their expenditures. And again, when you think about a private business, there's a lot of items that a lot of departments go into a private business. Human resources, payroll, finance, accounting, budget, procurement, all of those items would be a part of a private business. When you work for a county, those are really a central service that is paid for out of the general fund and just supports those enterprise or special revenue funds. But a cost allocation can also establish an indirect cost rate, which is used many times in federal grants. We see a lot of times with the uniform guidance from 2 CFR that the de minimis indirect cost rate that's recognized or has been historically recognized has been 10%. We actually found out at a continuing education class last week that they have increased this to 15% going forward, so on federal grants. So again, when you're applying for federal grant money, it may cost $100,000 to provide a service or to purchase something, but you also get to add 10% or now 15% on top of that to recover the indirect cost. And again, this is a standard practice among governmental organizations. So to briefly go over the timeline for Richland County, as mentioned previously, this was something that was discussed last year as kind of a forefront of this is what we're looking for. Or looking toward implementing. So the county did issue an RFP to find a third party to complete this analysis in this study. Cherry Bekaert was selected, and over the past probably 6 to 8 months, Cherry Bekaert's been working with the county team here to establish central versus receiving departments. And again, central are those departments that support these other receiving departments like enterprise, utilities, solid waste, and also special revenue, road maintenance, economic development, items like that. And in working with these departments, these internal service departments were asked to provide allocation information based on several different metrics. One of those could be personnel distribution. So if you think about the cost of human resources, that's very personnel based. So if a lot of their resources would be allocated to departments that have a large number of positions. You can also allocate costs on insurance claims. So from a risk management perspective, we would be allocating the cost of a workers' comp claim, for example, if that happened at a specific department or a specific plant. Same thing with facilities, financial transactions. When I think about it from a finance perspective, I also think about payroll. So the cost to run payroll, that is distributed back to the departments that have the majority of the staffing. And then, of course, technology support as well. And there's other metrics here. These are just kind of a handful that they talked about. Another example from, again, from the finance perspective, looking at the Department of or Division of Accounts Payable. So for accounts payable, they looked at all the costs associated with accounts payable. So this included the personnel costs, so for the supervisor and any of the accounts payable specialists. Also, any supplies or software expenses related to accounts payable. They looked at all of those costs. Then they looked at the number of transactions that accounts payable completed by department. And they apportioned that out to get to a percentage of the total cost of that department, or I'm sorry, the total cost of accounts payable that were applicable to that department. So that's one example. Again, that was kind of done on an overall basis from all of our different central or internal departments. So on this slide, you can see the different departments that we labeled as internal. So again, think of those as serving the rest of our departments. You can see here, again, all of these are out of the general fund. So again, county administrator, public information, finance, budget, central services, HR, those are a lot of those central departments. And then your receiving departments. Some of these are special revenue and some of these are enterprise funds. The top 75% are special revenue, and then of course the enterprise that we're going to get more into today are solid waste, utilities, and the airport. So this is a little bit busy, and I know it has a lot of numbers on it, but I did just want to give you the breakdown. So this again came from the Cherry Bekaert study, and what they came back with, you have all of the internal services departments on the left-hand side of your screen and the claimable totals. So those are the costs that could be claimed against other departments. So the total claimable cost across the county was a little over 31 million, 31.7 million. As we looked at all of these different funds, this first page looks at just special revenue funds. So these funds here, you can tell we allocated costs to emergency telephone system or the 911 center, fire service, stormwater management, conservation commission, neighborhood redevelopment, road maintenance, and economic development. Those are certainly not all of our special revenue funds, but we had to, some of these we had to think through. So for example, if the general fund was already significantly supporting a special revenue fund, it didn't necessarily make sense to then charge them for the services of the general fund. So an example with that is with our school resource officer program. So we do have that's a partnership with the school districts. A portion, the school district of course pays a portion, and then the county pays a portion. So then to charge the indirect costs on top of that, it was kind of like, going back and forth in that scenario. So we decided, all right, we needed to focus on the funds that, one, were self-supporting, and then also that made sense from the transfer perspective. So this is why we chose these 7 special revenue funds. Sorry.
You finish, and then I'll get her attention.
Okay. And then from an enterprise fund perspective, again, same thinking here. Again, same number of claimable costs of $31.7 million, and then the transfer back to the general fund between solid waste, utilities, and the airport is shown here. So the total budgeted transfer from special revenue and enterprise funds to the general fund in fiscal year 2025 was about $4.7 million.
Ms. Newton, you recognize?
Thank you. Could you go back to the previous slide, please? So this makes sense. I just am curious about how some of the calculations were done, because the AP example that you used is really straightforward. This is how many invoices, so we're just adding a fee. I can see the same potentially for procurement. This is how many RF whatevers we processed. But how did they look at other things like, public information, or maybe grounds and maintenance, or unless grounds and maintenance is just straight up, your facility is located here and this is how many hours people were there. Some of these just seem more subjective.
Yeah, so I think, and some of them are a little bit more subjective. They did not, some of it, again, we talked to the department, so I don't know if Ms. O'Kane has more information, but I do know with like budget department, for example, we don't have a direct line, like a financial transaction that we can say that's what we do. So we actually were asked, how much of your time is spent in these services, doing these, or working on these different funds? So that was something that each member of our team looked at their time and how much they spent. And I would believe that would be the case for several of these. You mentioned facilities and ground maintenance. That one was a little bit more direct because it was based on like square footage size. If we had like a custodial team that was had maintenance or upkeep, those metrics were actually pretty direct. So directly, if it was a larger facility, if we had more maintenance staff dedicated to it, then we were able to directly allocate some of those costs. But some of it is subjective. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. That is actually all that we had for the cost allocation plan. Again, I know that the next speakers will talk about their respective funds, and certainly the cost allocation plan did impact all of our enterprise funds. So as we go through the next, the next speakers, I'm sure they will talk about the cost allocation plan because it did impact each of the enterprise funds as well.
So before you leave, I guess to ask the question, as it relates to the strategic plan, does this mean that we've now completed that item? Or what are the full steps to say when it has actually been a completed task that we feel is done?
So this is actually something we look at every year.
Okay.
So I would say for the current year, yes, it would be completed. We do have another step involved with Cherry Bekaert that we are actually trying to get to a federally acceptable indirect cost rate. So as I mentioned earlier, the de minimis rate has been increased to 15%, but that's the minimum. So if Cherry Bekaert goes through this process and they find that our indirect cost rate is 20%, then we can actually start charging that against our federal funds. So as we're going out to try to get federal funding, it is the direct costs, and then we can add 20% on top of that. So that's kind of the next step. But again, as far as the cost allocation plan and how it relates to budgeting, we will do this process every year.
So with that piece, what you just said, that's literally the only proof that we would need to then be able to add 20% to it. There's no other.
Yes, ma'am. Once it's
Okay.
federally accepted,
That's it.
that's it. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, sorry. I thought you had a question. Mr. Brown, you recognize.
Additionally, in relationship to the question you asked about the strategic initiatives, another component of this is when we have external agencies where we have services that we provide, that we're using this to understand what we should charge for those services, vis-a-vis example, the detention center. So that's just another example. So as she mentioned, this is more of an annual thing with different looks. So each year we would complete it, but it will be a reoccurring task.
You recognize Councilman Weaver.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I got two questions. One, on the grants issue, page 8. If I'm understanding, the administration charge or whatever, 10%, 15%, does that mean the receiving group pays the 15%, or is that just cut off the top of the grant? Am I saying that right?
So with the grants, we're kind of talking about two slightly different things.
Okay.
So what we've done is a full cost allocation plan internally. So so that means that these departments are now paying for the services that the general fund provides. That's one piece of it. The second piece is related to federal grants. And so again, as I mentioned, if we are have the opportunity to apply for a federal grant for $100,000 to bring on, I'm trying to think. Let me talk to my grants team. What's a good grant example? Yeah. So, ARPA. So they're going to give us $100,000. Well, they may, if our indirect cost rate is 20%, they may give us $120,000.
Okay, so it's
So
just
it's
like an
more of
add-on.
just an add-on
Okay.
to what we would receive.
So we're not doing that yet, but that's what we're trying to get to.
Right. We're trying to get to that.
Okay.
Again, there are some. Now, again, there's not every grant allows you to add in indirect cost.
Okay.
That's kind of on a case-by-case basis. But
Okay, I have one more question, Madam Chair, if I can. All right, so on page 13, hopefully my colleagues are further along on this than I am. So just looking at this list, let's say county administrator, claimable totals. So if what we're saying here, Richland County Utilities, $197,000, are we saying that the administration had $197,000 worth of costs associated with that? That's what I'm confused on.
again, well, claimable costs. Again, when we think
Claimable
about
costs.
costs, it's not a direct cost, but it could be. I'm sure it's a portion of Mr. Brown's salary. I'm sure it's a portion of
Okay.
Mr. Thompson's salary as the supervisor. Those are kind of the overhead piece that is not a direct. You can't directly charge it to utilities, but you understand it's that overhead.
Okay, but we're not charging that yet.
We are not. No, sir.
We're not charging that yet. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I think I understand that now.
All right.
Okay. And one more question. Sorry, Ms. Newton, did you have your hand up? I was putting it down. Okay. I did, just so I can understand more, when you say that, I guess the outside consultant went and talked with folks and they kind of gave what they thought time-wise they spent.
Right.
So when you all received it, was there any margin of error where you say, okay, yes, we got this, but we're going to round down 5% because maybe folks are spending longer because they're newer in the position, or was there any accounting for that to see if there's a?
Well, I think what they did, so they gave us, they asked for our information. They put it out in the numbers and they said, does this appear correct? Is there anything that looks odd? I will say one that appeared odd to me was the airport. And it was far as facilities and maintenance division. There was over 700,000 allocated to airport just because of the size of the airport. I'm like, okay, that doesn't make sense. The entire fund's only $700,000. So we did make adjustments like that, and we will continue to fine tune this as we progress. And like you said, it could change from year to year as someone new gets into the position, or as we add different positions, that allocation may change between departments. And there's also, again, I'm only showing the allocation between the departments that we're truly charging, but you also have to think about, of course, HR supports all of the other general fund departments. But we're not going to make a transfer from HR to budget or HR to finance. We're just making these transfers from these outside funds.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I know this is something new that we're doing in the budget process. So Councilman Weaver is new for all of us. This is the first time we were all seeing it. And so I think as we go along, you know, if you all could continue as staff to kind of point out where this plays into the budget as a whole and just reminding folks this is a little different than what we've seen in the past. So
Absolutely. We will continue to do that. Thank you, Ms. Mackey.
Jada Brown?
I believe next is going to be Jim Hamilton Owens Airport with Director Maloney and the General Manager, Mr. Peter Savalas.
Do you want me to leave this here?
Thank you. You recognize, Rick.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Peter Savalas, our general manager for the airport. He's got a presentation here. Are you going to be okay pushing the buttons?
I think so.
Okay.
Handle that.
All right, and then I'll follow up with solid waste. But we have a Peter here, who is our general manager of solid waste, and then we have, of airports, and then we have Cindy Castelluccio from solid waste here, really holding down the fort at solid waste. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of council. I appreciate the opportunity to stand before you and present the budget for the airport. I know there'll be some good questions. Want to share with you first a little bit of an overview, kind of get the understanding of the scope of what we're talking about. I know some of you have seen this before, but just for my sake, this is my first presentation to you. I want to do this. And then I'm going to cover some operations and facilities impacts, and then look at the revenue, and then we'll finish with the highlights of the budgets. So. The airport itself is 182 acres big. The primary piece, of course, is the 5,000-foot runway that can serve general aviation aircraft. On it, once the airplanes get on the ground, we actually have a 9-acre aircraft apron ramp, asphalt ramp for airplanes to park. It's great. It's very ample. It serves up to 10 small to medium business jets. And also it has 30 parking spots, outdoor parking spots, where we can secure small and light, small twin engine aircraft. The airport does have a fueling capacity on site, 20,000 gallons. And we also have an automated surface observation system for real-time weather reporting out there that we have access to, and the pilots do too. The terminal itself is over 8,000 square feet of what I consider terminal and business center for use. And then we also have 11 hangar buildings of all shapes and sizes. And it's actually, if you add it all up, that's totals over 200,000 square feet of hangar facility for storage, for aircraft storage. And that's capable of storing over 100 airplanes on the airfield. So to that end, the operations of the airport has been, since I've been there here now going on 7 months, it's been very expensive in terms of the amount of aircraft that we have operating. Share with you a kind of a graph representation of how they've been operating out of the airport. Approximately right now that runs up to about 13,000 total up to this point in the fiscal year. We have 108 based airplanes out there right now, broken down as you can see on the slides. And the annual impact, this is a somewhat of a dated number. It's a 2018 number, $16 million. That was based on a study that was done in 2018 by the South Carolina Aeronautics Commission. That is currently being updated, and we hope to have a number out, a new plan and a new report in the next coming year, and I will be glad to share that with you about the airport. In terms of the revenue, if you understand the airport, the way it's operated, we have the revenue stream that comes from the airport is the lease revenue primarily from the airplanes that are based out there. They pay rent for the space they occupy. But we also receive revenue from our fuel sales, the fixed base operation, which is the aviation service provider out there, the people that pump the fuel, move the airplanes for the community. They make money off of that, and we get a portion of that. Overall, the current, as I pointed out before, the occupancy for the hangar out there is 100% full, which is a good thing. It's very stable, the revenue, and actually with what we project to see in the coming year, with the change in the service, the way we're going to be providing the service out there, we expect to see over an $80,000 increase in our revenue stream. For the fuel sales, also, you can see there the fuel sales is very stable for our airport, but it has a great opportunity for growth with the new FBO services, and I'll be partnering with that service because we're a mutual beneficially partnership there for the airport and for the fixed base operator to work together and to promote the airport for use. There's a lot of great aircraft that could be able to utilize the airport, and my hope is and my intent is to make this airport grow in that sense. So if there are any questions, I'm going to stop for a second. I've been going pretty fast. Finally, the big numbers. Here we go. So with all that, the revenue for this coming year, we're expecting a potential increase of 25 to 30%. The personnel cost involved for the operating the airport currently, good sound, maybe it's me. Currently, right now, the airport is a party of one. I'm the only one in the group so far. My hope is, though, to increase the salary, the staffing out there, because I will need assistance in terms of administering the leases out there. So I'm requesting money for that addition for an administrative person. Under operations, I've tried to so far maintain a very tight ship in terms of cost, being very cost effective in my expenditures. I hope to do the same this coming year and maintain that. Rely a lot, obviously, and this is important to note, that Director Wilkerson just gave that presentation on the cost allocation study, and she mentioned the facility maintenance of the airport. That's a big help for me in terms of going out. Obviously, the county staff can only do so much. They're limited by what they can do, in part because they have so many resources that they have, assets they have to take care of, and the specialized services that they have. So we do have some contracts that are out there that we utilize, and that's where I try to maintain cost-effective measures in terms of managing those contracts very effectively and juggling the balance between using county staff and outside source. Under our capital projects, I have 2 funded right now. What that shows is the allocation for the actual cost of the airport that's budgeted for the airport. And then, of course, there's the cost allocation study that Ms. Wilkerson has pointed out. So that's my story. Yes, ma'am, please.
Councilwoman Barron, you recognize.
Thank you. So you mentioned about the increase in staff.
Yes, ma'am.
And so you're requesting additional funds to support that.
Yes, ma'am.
Could you talk a little bit about, is that just one administrative coordinator?
Yes,
So
ma'am.
it's just one
Yes,
additional
ma'am.
person?
Yes, ma'am.
And so with that, it would be you
Plus
and
one.
her, or
Yes,
him,
ma'am.
whoever.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
That would be the intent, and it's just someone to help me. I can do a lot by myself, and I do try to do a lot by myself. But this would obviously be a benefit to me. It would help me tremendously in my work processes.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Terratio.
Thank you. And one thing I didn't see listed on here was, and I don't know if this is actually us or not, or the provider, but I know there was talk of more flight training at the airport. Is that something that will factor into the budget line items?
If anywhere it would factor into the budget, it would be in our revenue stream. Because the idea, to answer your question directly, the flight training, something like that, is a contracted service, a private business that would come do business on the airport property, and we would get from them revenue stream in terms of, like, if they lease office space or if any fueling they need for their airplanes, we will get that portion of that fuel sales that they buy from the fixed base operator.
And that's currently not something that's happening.
That is correct, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. That's part of the growth that I hope to obtain.
Yes, I feel the same. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, council.
Solid waste and recycling. So on this, we have a slide just to kind of review our services. And that includes collections, construction and demolition materials landfill up on Monticello Road that we maintain, the landfills that have been closed out that are maintained, the recycling program, which includes drop-off centers, and the special services division of Public Works, which is also completely funded with this program. In that, the personnel required includes management, collections, and all those services that I just described. And these are the staffing levels that we currently have in solid waste to cover that. Last year, we had asked for some new positions, including collections inspectors. And so where we've had troubled areas over the past year, which would include, well, I won't go into the specifics, but it included a couple of areas. And they were great to have, and they've helped follow up the contractor, check that things are tagged, if not tag them themselves, so that the residents understand what's going on out there. And that has been a great send to solid waste from council. There is one difference in here. We aren't asking for a person, but with our drop-off centers, we have 2 lead drop-off center attendants currently. And I just dropped the drop-off center number from 5 to 4 and increased leads. So that's sort of more of an internal structure that we would change this year. Not necessarily a new employee, but kind of a reclass. And then, of course, we have 19 special services employees. Special services a couple of years ago took over refuse control. So that used to be out at the landfill and is at Powell Road now with the refuse control officers working under special services. And they've been doing a great job over there. Collections and millages services, curbside collections just giving you a volume there so you can see right up front when you're looking at this that there's $35 million going into collections. The contract rates are anywhere from $22.68 per month to $29 depending on the contractor. And if we have to change contractors, that can affect our current margin to the collected rates we have with our customers if that should go up. The landfill millage includes our C&D, our construction and demolition operations, the drop-off center and recycling program operations, the closeout of the landfills, and then the management and special services to give you an idea of how those costs are broken up or rolled up. All costs with our contractors. The contracts have consumer price index rate adjustments. That has dropped this last year to 3.4%. But we have other costs that mix in with the CPI when we're buying things, personnel, other things that did rise above what the CPI numbers did. These are the contracts that are affected by CPI, and they're organized by date. And you'll see collection area 1 has an expiration date of its 3-year contract. It was 3 + 2 that we put in all the new contracts. And so next February 28th, that 3-year period comes to expire. So we'll be talking to you this summer about that. We'll need to be taking action on that. And the idea was in the original contracts that we'd have 3 years plus 2 depending on the performance of the contractor. All the rest of these coming up, e-waste, we could go to Powerhouse. We just got a new contract through procurement for our hauling. That takes things from our drop-off centers, for instance, and takes them to the locations they need to go to, the landfills. And the new company called Flash had just won that at procurement. The other collection areas and contracts, MSW landfill is coming up in a little over a year, so come this fall, we'll start to talk about that with the current provider at Waste Management and letting the council know 6 months in advance of contract expirations. We do have a couple indefinite deliveries with our mattress recycling and our household liquids. Cindy tells me that mattress recycling is always challenging. They're plumb full of mattresses to recycle, so at times we do have to put those into the C&D landfill when they're out of ability to take those. This is the structure that shows a balance between expenses.
I'm
Yes,
sorry.
yes,
Can you
ma'am.
go back to
Yes.
the previous one?
Yes,
Thank you.
ma'am.
Can you just talk a little bit more? You said that you would notify 6 months before the contract expires. Can you just explain what you mean by notifying council, the
Council.
public? Okay, but the RFP for folks to reapply goes out how far in advance?
Well, really if we're talking collection area, most contracts would be 6 months in advance, like, say, the MSW landfill. But collection areas, to get a new contractor in our experience, it takes 9 months to do that. So we would be informing you before that.
And saying this now just because I'm sure we're going to have future conversations, but I think, we look back at our strategic plan, the collection areas has been a concern that we saw in our recent report from the Ombudsman Office about solid waste and collection, and it's been a concern for many people's district. And so I'm hoping that as we start to look at RFPs or selections for next go round, that we are evaluating customer service, complaints, and at least looking at maybe how we address that in our next round of contracts so that we make sure that folks are delivering the way they should be, and that it's not putting additional strain on our staff to enforce them to do what the contract is they should.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank
Madam
you.
Chair.
You recognize Ms. Newton.
Thank you. And so I guess kind of following up on that, in terms of the 6-month notification, so understanding that it takes about 9 months to get a new contractor, is the 6 months in the scenario where you want to use that +2, so a vendor is performing well, their contract is up for renewal, and you're notifying us within 6 months that you would like to extend, which would be less time with procurement? Was that correct?
Yes, ma'am. We would be using that +2, and we have identified, we have a monthly report card or scorecard on the contractor's performance. And so we know who's performing well. At this time, right now, we really just have one area that isn't. So we know where that is. And so this is your 9-month notice today.
Well, this isn't exactly budget, but having been one of those troubled areas, thank you for resolving that situation well. Thank you.
Councilman Weaver, you recognize.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Maloney, just 2 quick questions on page 26, the collections and millage services. When you say county C&D, construction and demolition, I'm assuming landfill closeout, $437,000 a year. What is the 437, and what does that mean, landfill closeout? I guess we're closing that landfill at some point?
It's a part-time people that have to go do maintenance, and also the consultants involved in monitoring programs on that closeout. And it's two landfill closeouts going on.
Okay.
Any other things that we need to do in monitoring, say, underground situations
Okay.
that go on with that.
Clay barriers or something like that? Okay.
Yeah,
All right, and then couple lines down from that, special services, 1.492. Is that the 19 employees there? that someone?
Yes, sir. It's 19 employees, equipment, and materials that they require to do their job.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. All right, Director Maloney. I think we're safe to move on from collection.
Yes, ma'am. This next slide indicates the balances of expenses and revenues. And to do that, just to get to the bottom line, it would require a 4.75% rate increase for collections. We go through that. We have the expenses on the left showing the curbside collections expenses projected. Note that we have CPI at January 1st of each year. So we have to project what we anticipate. We used another 3% increase for that, for CPI, and kind of calculated the second 6 months of the calendar year that finish out FY25. But that carries on through. We have the management costs, the recycling program, landfill closure, special services, and then a cost allocation, as we talked about earlier in the presentation from the budget director, and then the total cost. Over on the revenue side, we have incoming from taxes, white goods, tipping fees at the landfill, tire revenue, and interest. So those are the projected revenues, and those pretty much are revenues that would affect the millage. And so those are shown down below. The 9.125 million is shown down below. The total curbside revenue projection is 34,756,000, and that's just compared against the anticipated cost and showing a shortage of 1.6 million in collections, 85,000 in millage, and projected then adjustment necessary to overcome that shortage.
Director Maloney.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And I apologize, I do not remember, because I don't have my book. Did we experience a shortage last year as well?
We had a rate increase, yes, ma'am.
And that was
we've
because
been-
of a shortage, is that correct? Or no?
It's because of CPI.
Got it.
So we've been following inflation. This rate increase is 1.7%, 1.6% above CPI, but that is taking into account our allocations, and we are trying to take the account balance north. The account balance was below zero, so that's been coming up a little bit at a time. So we've been watching that, and it's been going in the right direction, but we're still well below zero.
Recognize Mr. Livingston.
That 1.570 million for cost allocation, now, that was not in last year's budget, correct?
That's correct. That's the cost allocation that I previously spoke about. Yes, sir.
Does that not increase the budget? Does that not affect a need for an increase in the budget or whatever? Or was that accounted for somewhere else last time?
So that does certainly impact the expenditures, and so that's why we're looking at a 4 points. That's one of the reasons. And the way that we also allocated this out, it was a pro rata share. So the 1.5 or almost 1.6 million is for the total fund, but we did apportion this out so that curbside received their portion and the millage received their portion. So it was about a 80-20
So
split.
cost allocation did affect them?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's what I was getting at, okay.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions on that before I move? Okay. So this is what the rates would be. So the current curbside rate is $368.10 per year, and then that would go to $385.58 per year. That backyard is below it, going from $662 to $694. And then we show that in a little bit more detail with some other costs there, showing curbside collection and backyard service. Our contract rates with all the contractors are now at 1.8. And so they do complain about that because they feel like that should be higher. But they're still, that's what their contracts are at. So we're not going to ask any more of our customers than what we're paying our contractors in that difference.
Director Maloney, can you tell me as to why they think it should be higher based upon what?
Just the efficiency of delivering that service. They have indicated that it's tough to get it done for that. But they are contracted at that, so that's what we remain at. Disability backyards, so we do keep that list of people that do need backyard service because of a disability, and of course, that's at our current rate for all customers. There is a commercial curbside service, and we may not have pointed that out for 2 times the rate of the other customers, and that is just due to the volume they generate. And often they have more than one roll cart. We got our setup fees and other things. They went up marginally as well by just a few percent. And so those are this is our whole rate structure that would be shown. Things like e-waste and paints and things like that went up from like $1.05 to $1.10. So those are just if you come in to drop it off as a commercial person, not a resident. So residents, as you go down the list, have no charge. We have automation going on, so the contractors are always looking at efficiency and trying to get through the routes. Some of the routes have grown and do need to look at being trimmed because it is harder and harder as you have development going on to meet the needs. So they have been using automation as one of the means of that efficiency. Richland County's solid waste and recycling staff have been looking at strategic locations for drop centers and the ability to take on more commodities at those, and then just kind of enhancing those centers we do have. So we are planning a new drop center for this calendar year, and we have had meetings in Lower Richland to talk about the specific one there with the safety issues we have going on at it.
Director Maloney,
Yes, ma'am.
have there been any additional discussions related to any advancements in recycling availability for folks?
As far as the curbside service,
Curbside or additional drop centers for recycling?
there have not been as far as additional drop centers. We are looking at one had been in the Ballantyne area, and then we do have a small drop center on Clemson, which is in a very busy location. That one is just household recycling, so it's not a full-service drop center. And so while we have a safety issue in Lower Richland, I think that's primary. Ballantyne's been looking at one, then we need to look at one in the east. So replacing that Clemson Road Center with full service.
Councilman Barron.
Director Maloney, will you remind us of, you said there was going to be an additional site coming online this year. Can you remind us of where that's going to be?
Actually, we're looking at, because of the issues we have with the site we're on in Lower Richland, we're looking at moving that and then going to a new site in Ballantyne. Ballantyne, we don't know specifically yet. From last year, we had some goals that we just wanted to share, that we completed the ordinance, and we're certainly every year seeking approval for rates and fees. But with the new contract terms, those have all been completed with all the contractors being under the new contract that had some of these items that are bulleted here. We had a poor performing contractor in one area that was eliminated, and a high performing contractor took it over. We've moved a contract area line based on poor performance and provided that to a high-performing contractor. So both methods have occurred. We're certainly evaluating an area right now for the same type of thing as far as moving a line where contractor's not performing and looking at a high-performing contractor to take that over. So it's an ongoing job, and we'll continue to work on it.
Councilwoman Bear?
So Director Maloney, you state that these items have been completed. Especially when it comes to like the new contract terms, could you give us an update on, some specifics of, how it's going? I know you say it's completed, but as far as like the monitoring and such, because we had lengthy discussions about the contract, or the contracts that were to be awarded. So I just, would really like to hear an update on, where we are with, specific to the vendors, and it can be high level, but now, especially now that you say it's completed, I'd like to have an update.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question. The new contract terms are completed, but the work is ongoing. The penalties, there have been penalties that use that new customer service rate penalty, which is significant. And so that has happened. But the good news really is by bringing the contractors in each month, going through the contractor scorecard and how they're performing with customer service, has gotten it to the point where there's really just one contractor that we're able to focus on, where a year ago it could have been 3 different areas that were all going at the same time. And there's always calls. There's always, it's now, I believe, 92,500 customers. It continues to grow. And so there's going to be some things that do happen, week to week. The one that is failing is not intending to fail, but they have lost drivers for good reasons, for other reasons. They lost trucks that went down. But they all happen at the same time, and it's a big company that should be able to bring resources in. And so we feel like, hey, you're not treating Richland County well, so here's some time to correct. And so we work with procurement, and procurement's been a big help in doing this. So and then we sit down with the contractor. We go through the steps that they show us. We look at the steps and see if they look like the same old kind of steps, or if they're really doing something. And we're at a point now where we're saying, we don't believe you, so we're going to have to do something tangible. And adjusting a contract line takes maybe a month or so. Changing a contractor takes a lot longer. And actually, what we're also always concerned about is how is this going to affect our customers, the residents. And changing contractors isn't easy for them either. There's usually a change in day and other things that have to happen because you've got someone new and that's already working on that day with somewhere else. And so we try to keep it as acceptable to the customer as we can. And so we do have actions coming up for our one problem area right now.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
All right, are we ready to turn it over to Director Davis?
I think so.
Okay.
I want to know why everybody paused when I got up here. I think my reputation precedes me. I was told earlier to say that my name is Bill Davis, Director of Utilities. I am a speakeraholic. With that, we'll get started. I do want to tell everybody that we're going to kind of brief over a lot of these slides. I put them in there to indoctrinate, what we've experienced throughout the year and to kind of show some of our statistics and things so that we can carry it from year to year for historical purposes. So I will skip over some slides. I'll be glad to take any questions along the way, or we can wait to the end. This is just a brief agenda. We're going to talk about the general information, staffing, go into some of our critical objectives, and then go into water, and then we'll go into sewer, and we'll have a presentation about the rates, and then we'll do a summary slide. Again, I'm going to recognize my staff all at one time. Not yet, but I'm going to go ahead and these are our primary contacts. I know that you know Jessica Mancini and Johnny Hussein. They are handling a lot of calls from everybody, so I really appreciate all that they're doing. Enterprise fund, we had a great definition of what the enterprise fund is earlier, and we get rates and grants. That's the only money we get. And so with that being the case, we do periodically do rate study to make sure we can pay for ourselves. Geographic location has been a challenge. As you can see, that big dark purple area is the city of Columbia, and they're right in the middle of my 2 service areas. And so it takes us about an hour to get back and forth. And as the Southeast grows, we're always looking for opportunities to be more efficient in how we go across those areas over the course of the day. It takes, again, it could take up to 2 hours to go from one extreme to the other, and that makes a big difference in our efficiency. So we're looking at ways to increase efficiency. We're still doing that. We looked at last year. We've got some dedicated staff for these areas, and we're looking at also on the on-call, so that we can respond faster to each area. We have maybe some on-call specific people that are within those areas that can go faster. And so I always want to take a chance to recognize my staff. We've got some award-winning staff, and I want to have all my staff stand, please. If everybody would stand. And thank y'all for coming. And these folks work really hard. And I wanted to just kind of quickly highlight a few things. Dr. Sahad Kilko, we're very proud of him. He is a professor at the University of South Carolina, my alma mater, where he teaches hydraulics and some classes in the very classroom that I took those classes. So I'm very proud to have him teach a couple of classes over the last few semesters. Very proud of him. He just got his professional engineer's license, and we'd like to take a moment to just thank him for that. And Glemmy Hames is also a teacher, and he teaches the operators of the current and the future. And we're very proud of all the work he's done. He is participating in a Water Environment Federation study for basically epidemiologists who look at sewer, and they determine the next pandemic and the growth of those pandemics through epidemiology and looking at what's happening in the sewer system to predict where outbreaks are occurring. So it's a very up-and-coming technology, and we're proud to have Glemmy doing that. Mike Turan is my manager of maintenance. That's one of the worst jobs in the utility, so they have to work all hours and all days. And he's very active here in the state also in training operators and growing that through the Water Environment Association of South Carolina. And again, you've heard enough about me. I'm heavily involved in the state and nationally. And Johnny Hussein, he has gotten the first safety award that I know of in the district, and he got the state award this year, and he's on the state committee for safety awards for the Water Environment Association of South Carolina. And we thank Risk Management for helping us have one of the best safety programs in the state. And we got that award this year. We're very proud of that. All right, and notice my little...
Thank you. I just want to say thank you all for coming here today. We appreciate all that you do for Richland County. And thank you, Mr. Bill Davis, for always making sure to highlight your employees. We appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Critical objectives, I'm going to boil it down in 3 letters. PPP. You got people, you got planning, and you got projects. And if we keep the people, the planning, and the projects in order and we do it efficiently, then if we don't do it efficiently, then and we drop the ball or we drop the P on the floor, then it's PP all over the floor. It's not a good thing. So we don't want to drop any of those things. We want to keep it going. Sorry, it's always got to be an analogy, right?
Mr. Weaver, you missed that one. Yeah, I think he topped you.
Can we get back to dog neutering? That's all.
So that just boils down to we are doing more planning, and we are taking care of our people, and we're getting projects in the queue so that we can go after these grants. And if you don't have a project ready, we're finding you don't get the grants. So I'm skipping in. Again, This is the main slide I'd like to highlight. And of course, I notice y'all are noticing my little water and poopy emojis. I'm trying to compete with the airplanes, but each year that's hard to do. Construction costs we've talked about this, about 10% from 2010 to 2019 was the inflationary rate for construction projects. We're seeing about 39, close to 40% from 2020 to today. And it's not going down, it's staying stable. So all of our projects, as you see, we've been getting like one bid on like our last 4 projects. And it's very difficult in this market because, again, looking at some of this very summarizing, the quality of the product is going down, the workmanship is going down, but the price is going up. It doesn't add up to people like me that are getting old and kind of think that, everything should be going the opposite way. Price should be going down if I'm not getting good quality, but that's not the case. We've got aging infrastructure, and we've got people jumping ship to go other places and work for higher rates, and the rates are going up for workers. And that's a good thing, for the workers, but it's challenging for us because as a municipality, it's hard to compete with industry, it's hard to compete with private sector. We can't move as agilely as they can with the costs. The new indirect cost allocation, which was so eloquently explained by Madison earlier, I did some research on that myself, and these are real things. These are real challenges that we have to face, and that we have not been paying for those services. And $1.5 million out of our budget, it's a big jump. It's 11% of our budget. So it's a big challenge for us. Balancing rates and affordability has always been a challenge. I think you all know that I'm trying to balance the affordability part and look for creative solutions, and that's something that we're going to continue to do over the next year. Real quickly, our organizational chart I wanted to show, we are being highlighted, Richland County Utilities staff is teaching, training. I'm on a workforce development program. I speak about it on a regular basis. Workforce is one of the nearest and dearest things to my heart. And so I want to see us grow those people that need to be running these water and wastewater systems and make sure we're staying staffed. And we're at 95%. I believe we were at 70% when I got here. And probably close to 75% of the people on this chart came within the last 5 years. And so major hurdles for us to get to 95% staffed. Kudos to the council for putting forward some progressive things that helped us get staffing and retention where it needs to be. We're going to add a technician is what we would like to do. A few years ago when we added the Southeast system, we added some operators and we added some maintenance staff. We need to add a technician now because with construction and reviews and the processes that it takes, now we're seeing that our technicians that are in the office and our engineering staff is overwhelmed with all the load and all the ticket locates and the things we're having to do. So we need someone to be in the queue so that we can have a progressive career path for folks. And looking to have that career path is what's going to help us with retention. If somebody leaves or retires, we got places for people to go, and that's where we'd like to have another technician. And we'd like to part-time operator too, and that would be a great place for us to start having some progression also in our operations staff, so that when someone retires, that person could come in and be a full-time staff. Water system, I'm going to brief through. We've got 3 water systems. Historically, we've taken over failing water systems, and now we own the systems, and now we're looking to make sure that we're progressing that sustainably through the future. So that's I'm going to skim through this. This is all, if you have any questions, these are all historical information. The water rates, get to the bottom line here. So historically, we didn't have very many rates. You didn't have one since 2009. So then in 2014, we had one. And then last year, we did an in-house rate study where we were trying to project breaking even in 3 years. And so we added some fees, like hydrant fees, like all of our neighbors have hydrant fees, and we bumped up our base rate a little bit, and that got us a little bit further along. I'm going to show you in the next slide, but we needed a 10% and a 10% this year and next year to try to get to that break-even point. So if you look at this graph with me, you'll see the red line is what we had projected for those 3 bars on the right is this year, next year, and the year after. And as you see, the red was approaching the green, and the revenue stream was going up pretty linearly because we were trying to break even. Well, with the indirect cost allocation, that's going to set us back a few years. So I would say that probably it's going to be another 2 years before we're able to break even on water, because you see the blue line is the 11% out of our water fund that drops us back down to not making money again. And again, that's our objective as an enterprise, is to pay for ourselves. And it's very difficult to do when the majority of your money goes to pay the staff and the chemicals. So we don't really have any projects to speak of in here because we can't do any. So that limits us a lot. With the sewer system, this is the same slide we show every year.
Director
Just kind of
Davis.
add. Yes, ma'am.
Give me just 1 minute. Mr. Livingston, you
I have a
recognize.
question regarding rates. How do our rates compare to other counties, surrounding areas or whatever?
Well, they're pretty comparable to. We're kind of in the middle on the water, I think, as from last year. We did that study last year. That slide, I don't have it with me, but I'm pretty sure we were close to the middle of Casey and Columbia and all of our neighbors, joint municipal. Some of those, we were kind of right down the middle, if I remember right. Maybe a little bit to the higher on the middle. And so sewer, if you looked at our system, again, I like to show this because this really helps people visualize. We have 62 pump stations, which take a lot of effort to pull the rags out of the flushable wipes that are not flushable, and they get stuck in our pumps, and 10% of our manpower is spent pulling those literally with pliers out of the pumps. We have to pull the pump out. They weigh thousands of pounds. We have to get a crane, pull them out, pull all the stuff out of them, and then go back to operation. It's very, very difficult for my staff in that sense. And then also, it takes a lot of effort when the storms come and we have trees fall down on the power lines and things like that. So it's a lot of maintenance. And then if you laid our pipes, we have about 300 miles. So if you laid them end to end, you get to Birmingham, Alabama from Columbia, South Carolina. That's a long way and a lot of pipe. So we have a lot to maintain. The sewer rate history is similar to the water. We went from 2010 to 2018 and actually had a decrease sometime around the middle of that. And so we didn't have any increases. So before I got here, a rate study was done, and we were going to be raising rates in 2020, 21, but we postponed obviously 2020 for obvious reasons with the pandemic. And so we had a 19, 21, and 22 rate increase and no rate increase last year. And our current rate stands at 7203. And with that, I'm going to actually ask Will and Jackson to come on up and give us the rate study. If anybody has any questions along the way, feel free to ask. Oh, revenue. This is our projected revenue, and I'll let Will start there.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thanks so much for having me. My name is Will Carr. I work for a company called Raftellus. We're based out of Charlotte, so just up the road. We do rate financial consulting, management consulting for water and sewer utilities, local governments across the Carolinas and really across the country. Have been working with Bill and Jessica on the sewer rate study, which I'll talk about in just a second. This slide's a good tee up here, talking about our projected revenues for 2025. And what I want to spend the next few slides talking about is how we landed on this revenue recommendation for fiscal 2025. So we started on this rate study several months ago, and there's been a lot of hard work that's been put into it. And the goal today was to boil it down into about 4 slides. So I'm just going to hit the high notes, and I'm happy to answer any questions on the detail that you all may have. When we approach a study like this, our goal is always to approach it with a plan. We want to take a look at a 5-year period and make sure that we've got the resources we need to provide the reliable service that our customers expect. So that kind of rounds out why we do spend a lot of time and effort building a financial plan. We want to forecast our revenues out into the future, and then we want to forecast our expenses. We're focused on our revenue requirements, which are operating expenses, debt service, and then we've got to make sure we deliver our capital plan. Sewer is a capital-intensive industry, and a lot of reinvestment is required. By forecasting our revenues and our revenue requirements, we can take a look at what level of future increases we need out there. And then one of the most important outcomes of this study is a rate model that Bill and Jessica can use going out into the future for rate and financial planning. On the rate side, given the sewer service that we provide, we're somewhat limited in how creative we can be in charging for that service. So really kind of the goal of the rate evaluation of the portion of this study was focused primarily on revenue sufficiency. We've just got to recover what we need to recover to provide the service that our customers expect. So the revenue side, if you think about Richland County Sewer, the revenue side's fairly straightforward to project because it's that 70, most of our revenue comes from those user charges at $72.03. I wanted to spend a moment talking about how we prepared our 5-year forecast, of the revenue requirements. So our revenue requirements, which is just a fancy word for our cash needs, include our operating expenses, which we forecasted out into the future. We used 2024 budget as our baseline. It looked like, based on year-to-date financials, we were tracking in pretty well on that. And then we forecasted that forward at a blended rate of about 2.5%. In addition to our operating expenses, we've got to recover our existing debt. So there's 3 loans outstanding on the sewer fund. We had to make sure that those were baked in as well. So in addition to covering those operating expenses and the debt service, we've also got to make sure that we fund our capital plan. So the capital improvement plan we were provided has about $75 million in sewer projects to be addressed over the next 5 years. So that's about $15 million per year. And that's a lot of work to do. As we think about that $75 million, we got to start thinking about how we're going to pay for that. And so, we worked through a capital financing plan. There's still some ARPA funding available, about $10 million, from what I understand. There's 2 major projects out there, the Eastover wastewater treatment plant expansion and the 24-inch force main. It's my understanding that we'll fund, a portion of those projects with some sort of debt issuance out in the future. And then everything else is going to have to be funded through cash over time. So that pie chart kind of sums it all up. We intend to fund, it's about a little over a third, about $30 million in cash, pay-as-you-go cash or reserve funds, $10 million for ARPA, and then you can see the rest of it, kind of that green and the gray slices of those pie would be future borrowings over the next 5 years.
Will, could I?
Sure. Yeah.
For the first one, and I'm just thinking on kind of the previous departments that have already presented. So in the first one, when you talk about operating expenses and kind of what you're forecasting, does your operating expenses include this cost allocation?
We did include the cost allocation. It's about $1.5 million, as you saw in one of the earlier slides.
Sorry, I missed that slide. Can somebody point me? Hold on.
Do you have the number?
I'm sorry, I believe it was in one of Bill's earlier slides. Did it? Yeah, it might be actually, let's see. Down? Do we pass it? Oh, I know what you're talking about, Bill. I'm sorry. It's right here. So
We have not gotten to it yet.
Yeah, we hadn't gotten to
Okay.
it. I apologize.
It's like, I don't recall seeing it. It was collections. I remember you asking me.
Sorry, still the thunder. So yeah, it's baked in. Yep.
Thank you. Councilwoman Barron.
So with the capital improvement plans, these funds are, the ARPA grant, that's a separate grant from the ARPA funds that we already had? Or is that something that we set?
That's a finance question, I believe.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, if I may be recognized.
Recognize this here.
Ms. Barron, this is a RIA grant that came through the state SLFRF,
ACA Thomas, I'm sorry. Can you not use those acronyms, please, and just say what you mean? Thank you. Just for the people watching.
Okay, this is a grant through the state revolving fund, which is where all of the state ARPA dollars for water and wastewater improvements were placed and awarded out.
Don't follow up. So are those funds under the same timeline that our funds are?
They actually have about, I think it's a 6-month shorter timeline. So we are working very diligently to get this placed and get everything in line to be able to do that. These were for the expansion of the wastewater treatment facility, which will require us to actually borrow funding to complete it. Thank you.
Still, ACA Thomas. So, and I want to make sure I'm thinking about the right funds, but this pot of funds, though, is one that the state continues to put money in, right? And we can reapply for grants in multiple years again. Is I'm thinking of the right fund or no?
That is correct. They're just not ARPA dollars any longer. They're just they put additional dollars into the state revolving fund. Correct.
And we can keep applying if need be, or once you get awarded once, you can't apply again the next cycle.
Once you complete a project, you can apply for another project.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we keep moving on? Okay, so I really like this slide, and I'll kind of walk you through what you're seeing here. But this basically kind of summarizes the financial forecast all in one slide, as well as the rate recommendation for fiscal 2025. So the chart here basically shows our projection of expenses and revenues. And the bars on this chart is our projection of expenses. And so you can kind of follow along. The dark bars, the O&M expense, you see that kind of creeping up year over year just on an inflationary basis. You can see the light blue bar there, that's our existing debt service, so that's level through the forecast. You can see the proposed payments on the future debt ramping in there in the green. And then the gray is our cash funded capital, and that's going to fluctuate year over year based on the capital plan. And then sitting right on top is the cost allocation as we just discussed. The lines on this chart represent our revenues. The dotted line, the red dotted line there represents our revenues at existing rates. So if we didn't do any rate increases for the next 5 years, this is where we would be. We'd basically be at the point by kind of 28, 29 where we're just barely earning enough to cover operating expenses and debt service, let alone fund any capital, that we need to do. So in order to get in front of that, our recommendation is to do a 4% increase in the sewer rate for fiscal 2025. And it's important to note, we've assumed some 4% increases, out into the future as well, year over year. And one thing I wanted to point out here is I've done, I think that this is a good outcome for the sewer fund. I've done dozens of these studies and presentations over the last 2 years, and I can only think of 1 or 2 others that was below 5%. I mean, the inflationary environment's been really challenging for utilities, and as we'll show in the next slide, the sewer fund's in good financial position, and we want to, with these small inflationary type increases, we'll be able to maintain that.
Councilwoman Newton, you're recognized.
Hi.
Hey.
So the sigh was me hoping for magical funds to pay for sewer to just rain down from somewhere. But looking at this 4% possible increase every year, and I understand that it's an enterprise fund and how that works. It's an extraordinary burden on some of our citizens, particularly when you look at the fact that you're looking at a flat rate, and so you may be the household that has one person, and you may be the household that has 6 people, and you're paying the same rate. I guess I'm wondering, and I don't know who this question is for, it might be for church. Are there other, and our staff has been great at, pursuing grants. Are there any other sources of revenue, any other things we can do? You said our options to be creative here were limited, but if you have any additional information you can share, and then just as
we can certainly explore that with Bill and Jessica. Usually the bulk of the revenue is going to be the user charge revenues, and we have been able to obtain some funding from the Rural Infrastructure Authority, for the plant. And then, one thing I think to keep an eye on is the South Carolina SRF program, State Revolving Fund program, which we just discussed a minute ago. They do low interest loans, and that'd be something to kind of keep our eye on out into the future, given the capital, that we need. But it's something that we can explore for sure. I know that there's a schedule of other fees out there aside from the 7203. We did not dig into that in detail, and we could spend more time looking at that. But just in terms of major windfalls, it's always tough.
Madam Chair, if I may.
You recognize, sir.
I would just like to call your attention to that really nice, colorful graph. If you look at the gray, and if you took the pink, which is the indirect cost allocation, and you drop it down to the red dashed line, you'll see we now only cover O&M, existing debt, and the proposed debt, which he's talking about, these loans, and then we're done. Starting next year, all the way through, we're done. So the gray would not have any funding. So there would have to be, there couldn't even be a grant where we have to pay 25%. We wouldn't have any capital left. That's kind of where we're getting.
Thank you.
We wouldn't be able to do any projects.
Thank you, Madam
I'm
Chair.
sorry. Can you say that again, please?
Yes, ma'am. So basically, with all the costs we have, the recurring costs, the debt service, the proposed debt service, which is the SRF funding like Will was talking about, low interest loans, and the indirect cost allocation, we will be pretty much done with money, which means no other projects other than the SRF debt service, which is, kind of a smaller, you see the slivers very small for that debt service. So it would be small projects we'd be able to cover. We wouldn't be able to do any other capacity enhancing projects or the significant cost projects where we're replacing aging infrastructure.
And so when you say we wouldn't be able to do anything, can you go a step further and explain when we aren't able to do anything, what does that impact look like to residents?
So there's only one way to say it. So what it would basically be is we would revert back to the reactive maintenance. So if something blows up and breaks, we fix it. If we run it to fail, that's not the best model for level of service because you see a failure causes level of service to go down. And then the other thing is capacity enhancing projects. So where we would have a project that say, if we put in, like right now, maybe we're constricted because growth over the years, like in the Northwest especially, growth over the years has been driven by a development. And so that growth has been minimal in the sense of the pipe was sized for that growth and then not for any additional capacity. And so when that capacity's gone, then the only thing that we can do is put a stop on any growth in that area. That's all we can do.
Thank you. Councilwoman Bear.
So to that point, these increases and projections are really to maintain what we are already covering. It's not to add additional services. It's just really for the basic maintenance of what we're presently doing.
The ones under the bar, not the gray, the gray would be replacement costs, for pipes that are aged or pumps that are aged, treatment plant processes that are aged. But also for, like, if we have a 12-inch line and it needs to be a 16-inch line, we have a substantial cost to expand that line so that we can eliminate those constrictions in our areas.
So to that point, with us being able to continue to maintain what we have and change our old pipes and such, would allow us to bring on additional, could possibly allow us to bring on additional households or services?
Not very many. I mean, when you got a constriction, we currently only check 10 or more when it gets over 10. So if it's over 10 households in any particular, like we could take a house here and there, but we couldn't take, say, a 50-lot subdivision or a hospital or a, other major structure.
All right.
Councilman Weaver?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know if we want to wait till the next page. I have a question about the days cash on hand, which I think may be the next slide if you want to get to that. Or I can
We
wait
will
for
get
the
to
question.
that. We can skip to it if you'd like.
No, I can wait. That's fine.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir, you recognize.
Very briefly, and not to go backwards, but I think for this particular body who was not always a part of council, years ago, council through utilities had a study done. And if you look back at that study, whether you agree or disagree with it, it presumed that going forward, you would have raised rates every year from the year that study was done through where we are now. That didn't happen. It didn't happen at that rate, and it didn't happen, and then you had the pandemic. So now what you're looking at as you consider all these things is just to remember at some point in the past, there was a study that was done that said you would raise rates every year until, I forgot when it was, but that didn't happen. And then we had the pandemic and we held things steady to try to help citizens. And we use ARPA funds to pay utility services for citizens. In case you all did not remember that, you actually paid citizens utility rates during the time period that we actually stopped and we didn't turn anybody off. So there's a lot of money that is actually going in, and you were already behind at that time as a county. So again, the 4%, I'm not saying it's not a lot. I'm just saying there's a lot going into that for those of you who weren't at the council at that time to consider what you have done since that time and what this study is saying now.
Thank you, Mr. That historic look is very helpful. Hey, Will, I think we're ready to go to the next one.
Okay, great. So getting to the days cash, kind of the two key metrics that we're focused on here, debt service coverage and days cash on hand. Debt service coverage is a metric that's really closely watched by banks, lenders, rating agencies to make sure that you're recovering enough to make your required debt payments. You've even got bond ordinances and requirements to maintain at least a 1.0 or a 1.1 or a 1.2, somewhere typically in that range. I'd really not like to see the sewer fund drop below 1.5. That feels like a really good minimum target for the fund. So staying above there would be great, especially if we plan to borrow money within the next year or two. Then days cash on hand. General liquidity measurement here, basically just making sure you've got enough cash in the bank for emergencies and other things that may pop up. If you were looking at the last chart, you were probably saying, boy, those expenses are a good bit higher than the revenues. And here's the result of that. It's basically drawing down on reserves, using some reserve funds to pay for capital, kind of drawing it down to that minimum target there of about 1 year of operating expenses.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question on the days cash on hand, is that assuming the rate increase or before the rate increase?
It's assuming.
So that assumes the 4% rate increase?
Yep, that's right.
Wow, okay. So even with the rate increase, cash on hand is dropping?
It is, and that's a little strategic because, we have a really strong reserve position at the moment, and the thinking would be instead of pushing up higher on rates, let's use some of those reserves strategically to fund some capital projects.
Okay.
And kind of work that balance to where we're kind of getting back down to that target level to
Okay.
a place where we're comfortable.
Okay, thank you.
Will, can you explain the total debt chart again and why or how you got to the 1.5 number as a good threshold, I guess?
Sure. So debt service coverage is calculated as your net revenues. So basically, you take your revenues, you back off operating expenses. So it's essentially your revenues that are left to pay for your debt service. And what they do is they compare those two. And if you're above 1, that means you're generating more than your annual debt payment. So you should be fine to be able to make your debt payment. And again, you've got requirements in your bond ordinance that specify kind of a minimum, and if you went below that minimum, it would trigger a default. So it has to be taken very seriously for sure. The 1.5 is a general kind of best practice number for total debt service coverage. The rating agencies, I know that often they like to see above 2, but the thinking, again, we're balancing lots of objectives, and we didn't want to push up to try to get to 2 because that just means more in terms of rate increases. So it felt like a solid landing spot. Lori, you're welcome to come up and add to that too. Okay.
Thank you.
The other question we always get when we do this is, what are our neighbors charging and how do we stack up? So probably going back to your point, Mrs. Newton, this is probably where some of the heartburn is. I mean, you guys are at the higher end of this chart, unfortunately, as kind of our starting point for this study. You can see the 7203. It's kind of in that upper group. It's pretty consistent with many of the outside city rates in the area, also consistent with some of the other kind of larger metropolitan areas, counties across the state. But it's certainly starting out kind of, again, on the upper end of that chart, and it's about a $3 per month increase up to $74.91.
Recognize Councilman Weaver.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question on this one is, when you compare it to the city of Columbia, did y'all take into consideration the stormwater fee that the city of Columbia charges? I mean, they don't call it a sewer charge, but it's basically a rain tax. I mean, they have quietly tripled that on my water bill. Started out at $9.95, it's up to $14.95 a month now. So does that include it in? Because that would make the city's rates a lot higher.
So that was not included. We were just looking at sewer charges for 5,000 gallons of use, which is a fairly average residential home. But no, it did not include.
But y'all don't have a stormwater fee, do you, on your bills? You do? No. So that makes y'all more competitive against the city of Columbia, if you include that.
You mean us? We?
Yeah.
Us?
Richland
all
County.
of- yeah.
Richland County doesn't charge it. Good for y'all, good for us.
Madam Chair, if I may.
You recognize A.C. Thomas.
Councilman Weaver, our stormwater is billed through millage on the tax bills.
Oh, okay. Oh, I missed it there. Okay. I'll be investigating that, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I appreciate your diligence. Councilman Newton?
Thank you. And I don't know if you can answer this question, but the city of Columbia is planning on increasing rates. I'm not sure that they've done it yet. So does our position on the graph incorporate their projected rates or their today rates?
So everyone's rate on here except for Richland County is today's rates. So
Thank you.
Okay. And I would elaborate on that I would expect all of these to shift up just a little bit slightly as other utilities do increases. But that's it for me. Are there any other questions that I can answer?
No, Will, we appreciate your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Madam Chair,
Recognize Director Davis.
last slide. I promise. So this is the summary, as we do each year. Admin, thank them, by the way. I really appreciate them for bearing with me and all my questions along the way. Thank you, Madison. She's fantastic, and we're very fortunate to have Madison. The admin folks put together the first line in that chart, and then the second line is what we suggest. The highlights in red are the ones where we deviate slightly from what admin had their recommendation. And number one is that with the ability to build projects, which all of y'all know that I'm going after grants. And so in order to go after grants, I have to have shelf-ready projects. In order to have shelf-ready projects, I have to have that line item, sewer capital, which includes professional services. And so there's not much I can do with $500,000, but I can get some projects for $1.5 million. So I'm moving the what we would have put in reserve, Mr. Weaver, where we would have added to reserve, we're not adding, we're taking and putting it for projects now, since we lost that, that 1.5. Now we're having to supplement it with what we would have put in reserve. And then also looking at taking from our reserve $10 million to do the pay-go for those projects that we need to get done. And then looking at the bottom chart is just showing that we're bringing in $10 million from our reserves. And we're, the other two things was assuming 20 new water taps would give us $25,000 worth of taps. We do have a subdivision that would be definitely, hopefully, building by then. And then we have the water tap fees would be $30,000. And then we're looking at the potential of a broken pump or, something that would maybe be an expense that we would, this is not known yet, but predicting that we would probably have something that would break that we would need to fix. So we added $25,000, which is basically a wash on the taps to cover something that we don't know about yet. And that's all we got.
And if I may,
Yes, ma'am.
just one thing to point out. So that is why y'all did receive a few or an edited copy at the council meeting last night. So we did go ahead and adjust the administration's recommendation to match Director Davis's recommendation. So using that $10 million of fund balance, recognizing those tap fees on the water side, and then the pay-go projects for the $10 million.
Director Davis, I'm guessing on the second part of the chart, revenue, where you have the asterisk for 4% rate increase and 10% rate increase. Can you just explain that?
Yes, ma'am. That is assuming that these would go forward. The 10% that we projected last year for water and the 4% that Will presented in the rate study. These are in those numbers. No, those are the adjusted numbers.
Those are the adjusted numbers. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Was there, I'm asking the question if someone can answer, but was there any other charts done with any other amount of increase? So a 2% versus a 4% and where that puts us? Was there any calculations done that looks at that?
We did do a 3.5 at one point, and it was similar, in look to this. It's easy for us to make adjustments in the sense of running the numbers again with Will's wonderful and elaborate spreadsheet.
Okay, hearing no other questions? Administrator Brown?
Yes, members of council, again, this is one of the afternoons where you get to avoid hearing from me. So the presentations that you have are concluded. Certainly any additional questions that you have or desire to meet with staff between now and in future budget sessions, just please let us know. But that does conclude the presentation for this afternoon.
Thank you. We're at item number 5 in the agenda, adjournment.
Second.
A motion is second. Madam Clerk?
Branham,
Yes.
Pugh,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Teratio,
Yes.
Weaver,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Walker,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
English,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Attorney Wright.